Hello, and welcome to Lone Wolf Ministry. The last video we discussed my unique definition of ministry as it applies to Lone Wolf Ministry. And with this video, I'll focus on what a lone wolf is, specifically as it relates to wolves in nature and their natural habitat, to set the foundation for how that metaphor applies to humans, which is what we'll get into in the next video. So, what is the lone wolf metaphor, and what does it mean for this particular ministry, this context? It's my way of expressing myself and my experience of life. I've long felt like an outcast, struggling to fit in or be accepted anywhere that I go. And I realized that I'm not alone, that there are a lot of people who share my experience of life. And the image of a lone wolf, as I'll explain, really seems to be one that I identify with, and also one that is relatively well known. And hopefully, it is a way for me to connect with others, perhaps you, who identify with the lone wolf analogy and who might share my similar experiences of mine as generally not fitting in life. And I know the lone wolf metaphor helped me get a better understanding of myself and my experience of life, and so helped me cope with it a little better, and continues to, of course. And I hope it also can be useful to others as well, and useful to you, and other of us rare lone wolves in the world. And so I know that to start, it helps to understand what lone wolves actually are in nature. It helped me to know that. And so the question that first comes, I imagine, to the mind of those of my viewers and those watching the video is, why do I know so much about wolves? Lone wolves, of course, but wolves in general. I've gained a considerable amount of education and insight, mostly from my own personal research. And it all started when I used to have a dog who passed many years ago, but at the time I wanted to learn more about dogs. And my mom had actually had this book by the monks of New Skeet. It was called How to Be Your Dog's Best Friend. And I highly recommend it. The monks of New Skeet are Franciscan monks who fund their monastery by breeding and raising and training dogs, specifically German Shepherds. And so obviously they know quite a bit from generations of their work with dogs, about dogs and dog behavior and training. And so they wrote this book about training your dog and being your dog's best friend and understanding dogs and then understanding humans. And in the intro of that book, they recommend learning about wolves, which may surprise you or not, but because dogs and wolves share almost identical DNA, first of all, but also because of that, wolves and dogs share very similar character, culture, behavior, and language. And so the monks of New Skeet recommend learning as much as possible about wolves, because the more you know about wolves, the more you're going to know about dogs, which is where it started for me. So in my quest to find more resources about wolves specifically, there's a lot out there, but I whittled it down and narrowed down my search to a very interesting and profound and fun, really, book slash documentary called Living with Wolves by Jim and Jamie Dutcher, who are authors, but also a couple of environmental researchers and scientists. And one has studied different animals, Jim has, and then Jamie is a renowned environmental researcher and veterinarian who they both together built a yurt essentially and lived among a single isolated pack of wolves in Idaho for 7 years to record, document, learn, and eventually publish their findings on wolf behavior and habitat. And their profound research and extensive recordings and audio recordings and writings are really fascinating. I recommend looking into their work, but I essentially they found, among many other things, that wolves are just largely misunderstood creatures, including specifically for this video their views towards lone wolves, that we've largely misunderstood what a lone wolf is. And so that's where I began to become more intrigued, both as I learned more about them and resonated with the experience of a lone wolf in nature. So, a lone wolf, what is it really? Number one that I learned about lone wolves is they're extremely rare. So, in a pack of 8 to 12 wolves, there might be one lone wolf every generation, or even just every few generations. So out of, I'd say between 12 and, what's that, 36 wolves. So let's say one out of every 24 wolves is a lone wolf. So that's a pretty low number. And that's the thing about wolves. A very important characteristic is most wolves, the pack is extremely important, and they tend to stay in the pack in which they are born. And because leaving the pack is something that they'll only do as a last resort. And because point number two about wolves is that they crave and need the structure and the community of the pack as much as any wolf, even lone wolves, which surprises us because we often make lone wolves out to be these renegades who, are just fiercely alone and proudly by themselves and don't want or need anybody else and want to go through life alone. And we make them out to be that way. But the truth is, in wolves in nature, which I'll apply to humans in the next video, but wolves in nature, even lone wolves still crave and need that structure of community as much as any other wolf. So the question then is, why do lone wolves strike out on their own and leave their pack? And what we've discovered, and what Jim and Jamie Dutcher and others who have researched wolves and myself have found, is wolf culture is highly dependent on hierarchy. And there is a constant inter-pack feud for status among the pack. And this natural craving creates order and obedience among the pack members, as well as a sense of belonging. And it's fundamental, in the DNA of every wolf. The problem with that is that, if it can be considered a problem, is some wolves struggle to fit in. That's what these lone wolves really are. The wolves among the pack who struggle to fit in, find their place, or feel any real sense of belonging in the pack. And so these are who become the lone wolves, who, because of this fundamental inability to integrate themselves into a pack or feel that sense of true belonging, they feel compelled to really set out on a quest. And these are the pioneers who, very rare wolves that set out on their own mission to either find a pack in which they belong or create their own. Perhaps they find another lone wolf along the way of the opposite sex, and they maybe will start their own pack. And it's been documented that some wolves will trot hundreds of miles across months on end in their quest. So it's a fantastic endeavor, but it's one that three, in the nature of lone wolves, to set out really with their ultimate goal still to be that sense of belonging and sense of pack mentality. And so, four, a very important point about lone wolves that I've discovered is that lone wolves are actually critical to the health of wolves and of the wolf species. Number one is given the wolf's tendency toward pack fidelity, lone wolves' primary contribution to the wolf species actually, ironically, is the diversity element and the genetic diversity specifically with wolves. And they prevent the hazards of inbreeding that would normally come from being so brutish and staying in one pack for generation after generation. And they prevent those hazards by connecting, integrating, and breeding with other wolves from other packs, keeping that genetic diversity alive. And that, as part of that importance of lone wolves to the health of the species, is lone wolves also bring learned traits from their own pack to the mix of whatever other wolf pack or society they end up connecting with. Because as we've discovered about wolves, they actually do tend to learn behavior and skills for hunting, gathering, den keeping, and other critical survival traits through generations of learning passed down from older generations of wolves in their pack. And this is a very real and necessary and vital piece of wolf culture, that lone wolves can then bring what they've learned from their pack into another pack, and that keeps wolf society very vibrant and healthy as well. And the third reason that lone wolves are so important to the health of wolves and wolf species is that they keep the population strong, versatile, and resilient. Not only in the ways that we've mentioned above and that I just discussed, but also in other critical ways that really are impossible to measure, that we just haven't discovered yet and may never discover. But they've been surprisingly, lone wolves have been found to be surprisingly important to the wolf species in all of these ways and more. And so in my next video, I'm going to take everything that we've discussed about wolves in nature and apply those to how the lone wolf metaphor applies to humans in all of the ways that I've discussed above. And so thank you again for watching Lone Wolf Ministry.